brethren. There's too many young families, too much energy, too much excitement here. I was born and raised in Mill Creek Church, and boy, this is a delight to be here. Thank you. Now, the disclaimer always has to be made before I make any remarks. I'm a cow doctor. I am not a pastor. I am not a theologian. But I do know where God fits into my world. When I walked in this morning and looked out and saw all those cattle in the background, I knew I was at home. I wanted to go get my coveralls and a long sleeve and go to work. It's amazing, isn't it? So, as I was thinking about the children's message, you know, what makes you smile? There isn't a record in the Bible about Jesus smiling. But we know what made him smile. And we know what God smiled about. It's being here as a church family this morning. My comments are not just about the smile of Jesus, but the language of Jesus. I want to talk to you about that. Because is there anybody here whose first language is not English? Couple of folks. I'm told that English is one of the most difficult languages to learn in all the world. You know, Wayne made a comment that my brother rents his farm. My brother Thomas got his way through high school, and he liked English so much that after he graduated, he got to take it again that same summer, just so he could get his diploma. I asked him once if he ever took a foreign language in high school, and Thomas said, yep, English. Freshman, sophomore, junior, and senior level. So for some of you, English is not your native tongue. But how many of you can speak another language if it's not your native tongue? That takes work to learn that. And I really often wonder, when you're thinking about another language, communicating in another language, do you think in that language? Or do you think in English and translate it into that language? Maybe English is your second language. What if I brought the message this morning in Gujar or Mongolian? Even if it was a spirit-filled message, would you benefit from it unless you could interpret what was being said? And you might be able to see the smiles. You might be able to hear the nuances of the language, but can you understand what it's like to go to another country when you can't speak the language? Many of you travel internationally. I've had the benefit of being able to do that. But when you go to those other countries, can you communicate? The children learn that they can communicate with smiles. Can you speak the language? I often wonder, and I know there are a number of pastors here, so I'm at great risk. But I often wonder, in the Bible, when it speaks specifically about speaking in tongues and having someone there to interpret the tongues, if maybe that's not people from all over the world, nationalities that are all gathered together to worship using their own native language. You couldn't understand if I were speaking in Mongolian, but if there were a translator here, then you could. Maybe that's what that passage about speaking in tongues is all about. I'll just leave it at that. Think about that. I think about things when I'm driving from one farm to another. Now, you know my fondness for livestock, and I've had a wonderful career in veterinary medicine, and I continue to have a career, but many times I'm told how smart and special I am as a veterinarian because my patients can't talk to me. Really. And you know, that veterinarians have a special bond with their patients because they can't talk to me. Well, I beg to differ. Because you see, my patients communicate with me in a in many different ways. They use body language. They use sign language. They vocalize. And I just use veterinary medicine as a platform to communicate to others. And everybody loves living creatures. It's a wonderful way to start a conversation and a wonderful way for the livestock that give us an opportunity to speak a common language. That's what I use, even though there may be different nations that I'm visiting, there are different neighbors, not just nations. We're all blessed with special gifts. Whether it's the gift of learning, the gift of being an organizer, the gift of prophecy, many, many gifts. Who has the gift of teaching here? You don't need to raise your hand, but think about this. Are there teachers here this morning? And if so, what do you teach? Well, you may not be a classroom teacher. I think you should play in the game. I'd pay $5 to come see you play. Not just $3. Mona, are you going to put on shorts and play?
She used to.
No, I'm a coach.
There's something special about it, right? Oh, how hard is it to develop a lesson plan for a classroom? And I think about all the young parents sitting here this morning. Your teachers, every day. Those little ones are looking at you and they're modeling from lots of different ways that you communicate with them. I'm told that I whistle just like my daddy, and I'm so proud of that. I'm also told that I walk just like him, and that I chew my gum the same way he does. You know, we model. For teachers, it is critical to be able to communicate, to use effective language. In my international work, I am seldom in a situation where I don't have a translator nearby. And this is critical, because no different than interpreting in tongues. If you can't speak the language, you can't share the information. In our work as Christians who desperately want to share the good news of the gospel, we're called to be faithful to the words of Christ. Wayne read this for you. I want to read this again, and this is a little different translation. This is Matthew 28, 19 and 20. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. The words of Jesus have power. In the work that I do, many times I am a teacher. Now, whether you believe in Jesus or not, you must acknowledge that he was the most influential teacher in human history. And you know how I know that? Because his lesson plans are still here. We've got the Bible that was his lesson plan that was developed 2,000 years ago. And not only that, how old were you when you started teaching? When are you too young or too old to start teaching? Jesus started teaching when he was 12. Remember the story? How he got left behind at the synagogue because he was wowing his teachers with the words that he was using. What language did Jesus use? Now we know he was a Jew, probably spoke Hebrew, but does anybody know whether he was multilingual? Is that anywhere in Scripture? He was a teacher. But what did the disciples do when they moved from where they were first commissioned into other parts of the world, following the Great Commission? Greek? English? German? The Wycliffe Company does a wonderful effort in translating the gospel into every language that you can imagine. And yes, there is a Mongolian Bible. But does the language that we use change the meaning of the words that Jesus has for us to understand? In some cases, yes, because of the cultural nuances, the phrasing, the sentence structure, and so forth. A lot of Spanish, the sentences are built exactly opposite from English. Their nouns are at the end. Our nouns and adjectives. It's interesting. But with the gospel message, Jesus promised us this in Matthew 24:35. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will never pass away. The words we use, if they are Christ's words, never pass away. In John 15:7, he says, if you remain in me and my word remains in you, ask whatever you wish, and it will be given you. So the language of Jesus, without any question, is the words that he used. The words that we use when we're teaching are critically important. In Mongolia, I interacted with herders in central Mongolia. I interacted with farmers that are no longer nomadic. I interacted with many government officials. They have a lot of livestock and agricultural issues there. I was a teacher, and you can't get away from that. But it's not just the teaching that's important when we learn the language of Jesus. Jesus used his hands. Jesus did more than teaching. He touched. That's a language. Matthew 9:27-29. As Jesus went on from there, 2 blind men followed him, calling out, have mercy on us, Son of David. When he had gone indoors, the blind men came to him, and he asked them, do you believe that I am able to do this? Yes, Lord, they replied. Then he touched their eyes. He touched their eyes. He spoke the words, then he touched their eyes and said, according to your faith, it will be done to you. Luke 18:15. People were also bringing their babies to Jesus to have him touch them. Do you know the power of the human touch? It is the hands. It is the comfort that a baby receives when a mother hugs that child around the neck. How many of us are actually comforted by a firm handshake? There's a really strong scientific basis for this human touch. I'm a science nerd, so you'll have to understand. There have been studies done that touching releases a chemical in your brain that's called serotonin. And Regina, that's the same thing you get when you run and you get just all wired up, you break over, and all of a sudden, it's like magic. But it's a chemical response, and it has a very calming effect. There's dignity when you reach out and interact and touch someone that you perceive as being below your status in life. They may think they are not worthy of you to touch them. Jesus was intentional in touching to reach those that are marginalized around us. Remember that? Yes. Most veterinary work involves putting our hands on our patients and touching our patients. And I've got the scars and nicks and stitch marks to prove that. They're not all happy to see me. If any of you have read those wonderful little books by James Herriot, All Things Bright and Beautiful, and all things warm and cuddly, whatever. I'm going to write a book. It's called All Things That Bite and Kick. That's the reality of what happens in livestock medicine. But I'm reminded this, that I've never touched or healed anything. When I was a young veterinarian and first came to Waynesburg practice, my mentor, Dr. Buzz Boyd, took me over to see Dr. John Woodward. Old Dr. John. He was crotchety, small, crippled up. And the first thing he asked me was, "Do you think you're smart?" I just graduated veterinary school, heck yeah. I'm a DVM, I'm a doctor of veterinary medicine. I'm a dog vaccinating man. "Do you think you're smart?" He said, "Do you think you'll heal animals?" Dr. John was probably in his early, mid-80s when he challenged me with this. And I made some sort of a lame comment that, boy, I'm sure going to try. You know, I know I can't heal them all, but I'm going to sure work at it. And he looked at me and he said, "You know what? I've been at this for 45 years and I have never healed one animal." And I thought, "Oh, you old quack." No. He said, "Never forget in the work that you do that only our Heavenly Father can heal animals. Don't mess it up." The Church of the Brethren, our Mennonite brothers and sisters, we all believe in the power of touching, of laying on of hands. And it's a part of our faith tradition. We believe that the power of human touch is overwhelming. We know from clinical trials that doctors who touch their patients and pray with them prior to surgery have better outcomes. Now, regardless of the reason for that, it speaks to me as a member of Christ's family that He wants me to touch. Most of our Christian work is done in our communities when we touch the lives of someone that is important to us. Or we touch the lives of someone that deserves the dignity of our touch. We have hands-on interaction directly with our church families, and our Brethren Disaster Relief and Brethren Volunteer Service is the hands of service. The hands of service. The hands of Jesus in our denomination. But that's not all that Jesus used. He used His words. He used His hands. Jesus used His feet. How many people come in your door? How many people do you come into contact with each week? Per month? How many new people walk through the door of Mountain View Church of the Brethren every week for worship service? You know, I made the comment when I started, this is an amazing church family. There's youth. There's energy. There's life here. And you're blessed by that. Please don't overlook it. Even if there's those among us today who have never attended before, welcome and please come back. That's the pastor's job. That's your job as a member of this church family. I'm sure that you're aware that there are many congregations in our Shenandoah district, our denomination, that are in despair because their numbers are shrinking. It's not just the Church of the Brethren. It's the Christian church in general that we notice. We're all aware of this because it's becoming more and more difficult as a Christian belief to attract young adults, youth, young couples, and I'm sure you wonder why. Here's a perfect example of how it can be done. The mainline church, the church's needs may not meet their needs. It may not. And how do you respond to that is the critical thing. I'm just suggesting that you consider meeting them where they are. Use your feet. Go find them. If they're not coming in the door and you wring your hands and you wonder, why are they not coming to me? Then go to where you find them. It doesn't have to be international. It doesn't have to be. That reminds me of the Furry Freak Brothers. You know, I love that picture. Jesus said, go find them. Where are they? Use your feet. Matthew 5, 1 through 2. Jesus, and now when he saw the crowds, he went up on a mountainside and sat down. His disciples came to him, and he began to teach them. He found them. Then he was able to teach. Matthew 15, 29. Jesus left there and went along the Sea of Galilee. Then he went up into the hills and sat down. They followed him wherever he was. Now there's all sorts of ways to travel, whether it's your feet, or whether it's a horse, or whether in Mongolia we traveled in style. You couldn't get there from here. It's not exactly downtown Penlair in central Mongolia. I've heard of stories where Vacation Bible School moves from the church building to the parking lot of the projects. That's where the kids are. Go to them. I think about the unchurched kids that come from urban and suburban areas. They end up at Camp Brethren Woods. They may never have heard those Bible stories before. The camp comes to them. Maybe we need to be the feet of Jesus to seek out those who need to hear the good news. We live in interesting times, don't we? I think it's important to be current, but be careful. Because if all you want to live on is the bad stuff, watch the news. If you want to know what's good, be here. What was politically correct in my youth, Wayne, our youth, or my young adulthood is no longer fashionable. With age and experience, I've changed my mind about a lot of things that I thought as a child. Remember the verse that says, when I was a child, I thought like a child. Now that I'm older, we're all in a changing lifestyle, a changing life focus. Even Jesus changed his mind. I'm now convinced more than ever that evangelism, an in-your-face message of the gospel, is not effective. It pushes people away. It doesn't resonate with our audience. In many of the places of the world that I visited, you could not even use the word of Jesus. They would expel you from your visa. You're disinvited from the country. But what I know is this, it's not always words. And Jesus taught us that. What I know is that the language of Jesus has many faces. His words, his hands, and his feet. If we can't use words, friends, we can still use our hands and feet. Maybe being upfront with the gospel, pushing that in someone's space, is not the way to do this. I'm energized by work that Jesus did in his life of commitment by using his hands and his feet. Following the Great Commission, friends. We serve our neighbors in all nations or neighborhoods, in your own backyard, in your own family, yes, internationally or other. And we break down barriers of color and occupation and social status and educational achievement and all of the other things that disvalue a human being to the point where I'm better than they are. Is that what Jesus wants us to do? Is that what he wants us to believe? Remember the Great Commission, though. He told us to go spread the gospel. And sometimes, friends, sometimes we can use words. Amen?